Okay, this is a new video for A Citizen Speaks with Stephen Polgar. And I haven't been available for the last week or so, but I wanted to continue. And again, I would like to thank those of you who've already subscribed and invite anybody who's interested in some of the topics that I cover to please contact me and to listen to the videos. And if you're interested, I'm setting up a Patreon account, and you will be able to subscribe and get regular materials, including some of the writings, the sources, the books, bibliography, and so on, that I'm reading and that I'm basing my many of these ideas on and many of these videos on. I've decided that I'm going back to reading the material because I'm not very happy with just doing it sort of off the cuff and even from notes. I'm more comfortable with the accuracy of something that is written. So this particular video is called Mass Psychosis Revisited. And the name may be new, but the phenomenon is not. It is important to study history to learn about how easily large groups of people can be misled to support incredible crimes and follow absurd ideas. The Bible is one of our earliest sources of a story of such a misdirection. After descending from Mount Sinai with the Torah containing the commandments he received from God, Moses sees his people adoring the golden calf of Baal and dancing in revelry. He smashes the tablets in a fit of rage at the weakness of his people's faith in God. While he was away in their ignorant search for consolation and the illusion of temporal security, they turned to a substitute, one connected to an earthly creation, a concrete object, and the ultimate illusion of immediate gratification. They sacrificed the abstract, unfathomable perfection and power of Jehovah, who has designed in his generosity to give his laws to Moses in a place hidden from and unknown to his people. They, in their impatience and petty need for security and certainty, abandoned the burden of belief in the Almighty and turned to the easy and accessible gold statue of the calf and the false god, Baal. The story is the archetype of how humanity can be easily misdirected using their attachment to the mundane, their reduction of goodness beyond understanding to a pretty, glistening, golden image which represents their indulgence in momentary needs and the transitory pleasures these provide them. As an archetype, this biblical story is repeated endlessly. The thriving, successful Greek city-states end up destroying their civilization in the Peloponnesian Wars. Since the two most powerful states of Athens and Sparta could not come to an agreement on how to share the benefits of their respective gifts, they abandoned the higher values of their predecessors that their predecessors had fought for the approaches to maintaining and expanding their wealth and power, for their own particular approaches. The Romans did not learn from this terrible example. Though they adopted a lot of Greek civilization and its temporal achievements, After many centuries of expansion and power over a large part of their known world, they eventually descended into a form of idolatry and revelry, like the Jews in the Bible. In their case, this involved a long period of decline and degeneration until they were overpowered and subsumed under the power of the Germanic peoples who had invaded the northern parts of Europe. Next came the Holy Roman German Empire, or the German Holy Roman Empire, appropriately misnamed since it was not Roman and certainly not just German, and it was by no means holy. And it's a question whether it even was an empire. Based on its version of Christianity, adapted to the political considerations of the many kings and princes who ruled Europe through the Middle Ages, the purportedly Christian group of nations engaged in an endless series of wars between the kingdoms that comprised it. With the arrival of the Renaissance and its attempts of leaders and philosophers to redefine the meaning of a Christian continent, sadly, the number of wars did not decline. In fact, one of the most brutal, the 30 Years' War, which claimed 2/3 of the population of the German principalities, was one of the main features of the 17th century. The incessant wars in Europe were complicated by the appearance of the Ottoman Empire, which invaded the continent from the southeast and cut off a large chunk of Europe for itself. They ruled a large part of the Kingdom of Hungary for 150, and what is known to us as the Balkans for roughly 200 years. In each of the above segments of European history, large groups of people were indoctrinated with ideas justifying their opposition to, and in the case of wars, the killing of people whose beliefs differed from theirs. The saddest records are of the crimes committed by the Swedish armies and their Finnish soldiers in German states, and the no less terrible retaliation of the Catholics from Austria, Bavaria, and their allies. These examples used religious ideas to infect the minds of people and to induce them to commit murder, rape, robbery, and devastate the countries of their opponents. These historical examples devolved into absurdly minimal levels after the industrial advances of the 19th century. Socialist ideas germinated in the early part of that century in France, Germany, and England, all of them sharing a rejection of religion and a belief in God. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels became most influential through their writings and their recruitment of followers from the middle of the 19th century. They borrowed many of their most extreme and anti-clerical and atheistic ideas from the French Revolution and its ideologues like Georges-Jacques Danton, Jean-Paul Marat, and Maximilien Robespierre. Their followers emulated them throughout the 20th century, not just by relying on their simplistic economic and political ideas, but by extending their murderous crimes. With the development of ever more sophisticated technological methods, they were able to kill much larger numbers of people than was possible with the use of the guillotine during the French Revolution. That brought mankind into the 20th century, in which ideas devolved into ideologies, replacing religion and indoctrinating the least knowledgeable to follow the dictates of totalitarian dictators who emulated their predecessors but were able to wreak much greater havoc because of the new tools at their disposal: media and weapons. The first was and continues to be used to impress the least informed and skeptical, and once a large enough number of these people were entrapped as fervent followers, they could be used as agents in the execution of the goals of the leaders. The method was developed to such a degree of effectiveness that ordinary citizens who in previous ages could never be enlisted for such crimes became executioners. all the constraints that had been imposed with varying degrees of success on human beings were torn away, and the extermination of millions in Nazi and communist concentration camps was accomplished in a little more than a few decades. Reading about the communist terror of the 50s in Hungary brings back memories of the Nazi terror in that country that took place 6 or 7 years before that. These differed from earlier mass murders mainly in their scope and magnitude. No part of society was spared, especially in the under communist regimes, so that despite the slogans and the endless paeans to the working class, many workers who dared to challenge their communist bosses ended up in prison cells next to ex-aristocrats. They were tortured equally and branded as enemies of the Democratic People's Republic. As in earlier periods, these barbaric acts conjure images from the Bible and from poems like Dante's Inferno. They seem to have been ordered by Lucifer, the fallen angel ruling over hell, and the men who commit them are his executioners. Without a doubt, these crimes of the 20th century were the results of a turning away from God and the glorification of the golden calf of atheism, scientific materialism, and the promise of an earthly paradise. Once the commandments that Moses had brought down from Mount Sinai were rejected, killing men, women, and children in cold blood was easy. There were no limits to the justification of crimes of any magnitude. The sad fact is that although many who were responsible for these crimes were punished, many escaped temporal retributions. Some who bore responsibilities for these crimes lived into old age in Germany, Russia, and the Central European countries which had been the vassals of the Soviet Empire. An example is Antal Opro, who was directly responsible as one of János Kádár's right-hand men in the persecution of Hungary's people who revolted against the communist dictatorship in 1956. János Kádár was the Communist Party chief who led the re-established communist dictatorship after the defeat of the revolution in 1956. Antal Opro was the Hungarian Socialist Workers' Party official responsible for the quasi-judicial procedures against an execution of Imre Nagy, the prime minister during the 1956 revolution, Paul Molitor, who was the defense minister at the same time, and Géza Losonczy, Attila Szigeti, and Miklós Gimes, and for the execution of around 234, possibly more people who at first resisted, then fought against invading Soviet armies. As an aside, in a country whose population is around 10 million people, the number is terribly high, 234. If the number of people tried and convicted of that crime of standing up for the freedom and independence of the country is added with the number of those whose lives were ruined and many of whose families were impoverished and destroyed, the estimates begin to be in the hundreds of thousands or even higher. Those numbers don't and can't include the vast numbers of people, likely the whole population of the country, whose mental state and thus whose lives were adversely affected by the reimposition of the Soviet dictatorship. So back to Antal Opro, he survived the collapse of the communist rule in Hungary and lived until 1994. Was never called to account for his activities after the defeat of the 1956 revolution. He lived in a house in the exclusive Rose Hill of Buda, where he was a neighbor of the Communist Party chief, János Kádár. The house was expropriated, that is stolen, from Aladár Sebestyén, a survivor of the Holocaust. After the defeat of the 1956 revolution, the party settled Opro into the second floor of the large villa and gave the first floor to Mihai Jáner Bakos, The man known to the victims of the terror in the 1950s, the communist terror in the 1950s, as the bloody judge for his eagerness in handing out death sentences. This Upro was the grandfather of Clara Dobrev, who is now active politically beside her husband, whose connections to the previous communist regime of Janusz Kadar are also well documented, and who, as prime minister in 2006, ordered a bloody police attack against peaceful demonstrators on the 50th anniversary of the 1956 revolution. Her husband's name is Gyurcsány, and he is the leader of the minuscule opposition party in Hungary today. He ordered the police to attack the demonstrators who were of the at the time opposition party of the Young Democrats, and he beat unarmed, peacefully demonstrating civilians who were actually leaving, going home. The police beat them, and many of them were injured. Some of them lost their eyes, and there were other horrible things happened. The scars of 40 years of communist rule in Hungary are unhealed by circumstances which, without more mundane causes, can only be ascribed to the grace of God. Hungary's people are slowly overcoming the awful legacy of the 20th century. They have 3 times voted into office a government which is firmly grounded in the protection and nurture of the country's traditions, proudly espouses the country's Judeo-Christian heritage, fights for the security and safety of its citizens, magnanimously supports families in an effort to reverse the decline in its population, and has played a unique role in defending these values on a continent under the attack and growing sway of leftist, socialist ideologies based in materialism and espousing the most absurd ideas. These range from simple-minded theories about climate change, race, and gender to economic programs demonstrably leading to failure. And finally, a most dangerous expansion of the war in Ukraine, which is destroying that country as it kills thousands of its soldiers and civilians. This is a warning to us living here in this wealthy and once freedom-loving country, freedom-loving and respected country. What we thought were permanent foundations of individual rights and liberties are quickly being eroded by the same type of people who established Soviet communism and imposed it on the peoples of Central and Eastern Europe. Those of us who do not have the experience or have not read about the events of the 20th century under Nazi and communist rule do not realize how easily such crimes could be carried out, even here. They do not recognize as early signs of the encroaching evil, although it spreads in many forms, social, cultural, and political. We must wake up and reject the glorification of the golden calf of material well-being, the promises of happiness in the name of Baal, and understand that unless we find our Moses coming down from the mountain, smashing the tablets inscribed with God's commandments, shocking us out of our thoughtless dancing, we may lose the gifts bestowed on us in the 18th century. We may become the victims of the self-serving agents of evil, like so many millions had in Nazi Germany and the Soviet Empire. That is it for today's video. And again, thank you for watching, and please subscribe and continue to support my broadcasts. Thank you, and see you until next time.